Norman Camelgard, tape 2. You were telling us about when
Before the war,
just before the war, when changes were occurring.
I became aware of it. 1938. I was already 10 years old, going on 11. Excuse me. I was aware of it, of things going bad, because my brothers read My Kampf. And I remember, in Polish as a matter of fact, and I remember distinctly that they pointed to one page and they said, this page tells it all. And Hitler had 10 points of his program. The first point was to defeat Bolshevism, which I didn't understand very well. But the second point I understood very well, and that was to destroy all Jews. And I knew this is bad news. My family was too poor to do anything. There was no place to go. We didn't have money to go overseas. And maybe even if we would have, there was no place to go. Nobody wanted Jews, especially from Eastern Europe. So the time started, we started to feel, as the war was closing in, we started to feel that things are going to go from bad to worse. Then in 1939, in September, the war started, and immediately, as soon as the Germans came in, there was immediately a terrific change to the bad.
What kind of change?
Well, first of all, there was no food in town. You had to stay in line, for instance, for bread. And in many cases, they would single out the Jewish people from the line and chase them out so that the non-Jewish people can get to the bread first. And immediately they started with their destructive laws against Jews. I don't remember in detail, but they started to beat people in the streets, and things started to get very, very bad.
Did you have to wear a yellow star?
Yes, that took place actually, if my memory is correct. That law went into effect in December of 1939. The law came through that every Jew from 12 and on has to wear a Jewish star on his armband. The Nazis called it the Schandeband, which means the band of shame. And at that same time, we had returned to grammar school, by the way. And one day the principal, his name was Maciek Kuzminski, came into the class, and he said that the order came in from the authorities that Jewish kids no longer allowed to stay in school, and with the finish of today or this weekend, they no longer should return to school.
How were the children, the non-Jewish children, after these laws passed and the stars?
They weren't any sympathetic anyway. The vast majority of the population took advantage because we had no rights. In Jałoszczyce, any Polish family or any Polish individual had the right to demand any apartment from a Jewish family. All they did is gave you notice, and you had to vacate, and they took over. So the vast majority of them took advantage of the fact that we were oppressed. And
as a young boy, how did you feel?
I felt very bad. I understood what's going on. I also understood the frustration that there was nothing that can be done. My oldest brother, Israel, apparently he understood. Obviously, he understood much better, and he tried to convince my other two brothers that they should go east to the Russian side. because he said at least there may be some hope. For some reason, my parents, maybe due to lack of finances, my father had no money to give them to go east, and this was only this opportunity was only open till June of 1941, when the war with Russia started, and for some reason they didn't get to escape. If they would have, obviously they would have had a greater chance to survive.
Were you frightened?
Always, always. In the beginning, when these various laws passed against Jews, one of the laws was that Jews can no longer conduct any business with textiles. Now, everything that every business had textile involved. The Germans also considered leather goods textile. I don't know why. So whatever my father had, the coats that he had from his business, were distributed all over town to people, begging them, would you take in a coat for us? Would you take in a coat for us? Some did, some didn't. Some did, and whenever we wanted it back, we got it back. Some took it in, refused to give it back. So there was always this fear. One day the Germans came to the house and they looked for textiles, and they found some stuff hidden which belonged to my uncle, to the neighbors, and to us. And they were looking for my father. And I was very frightened. I didn't sleep home for months. I slept in different houses every night, friends' houses, relatives' houses. Had a terrific impact on me.
Before the ghetto was set up, you were in a ghetto?
Well, it was a ghetto to the point where there was no fence around it. The fact that we were not allowed to leave the town, the borders of the town, then you can consider it a ghetto. For leaving the borders of the town, you were shot.
Who guarded the borders?
Nobody. But you were afraid from the Polish police. You were afraid from ordinary Poles that they may hold you and turn you over to the police. You were afraid from passing Germans. You were just frightened, because the punishment wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It had to do with being shot.
How were you separated from the other part of the city, the non-Jewish part?
No, we lived together with the Gentiles in the city. The only difference was they were free to go and come whenever they wanted and wherever they wanted. We, the Jews, were not allowed to leave the borders of the city.
Were people, you mentioned a woman and her child were sent to live with you?
Yes, yes.
Were other people sent to live with you at that time too?
No, but the refugees that arrived from the big towns, the Jewish institution, the Judenrat, they distributed these refugees into apartments. So some people, they took away one. If somebody had 4 or 5 room apartment, they would take away 1 or 2 room apartment for these refugee families. Some people had smaller apartment. They put in as a border in your house. So in our case, we had this old lady with her granddaughter.
You mentioned a Judenrat. What do you know about it?
Well, they were very powerful. Everybody was powerful against the Jewish population, especially the Judenrat. They had certain commitments to fulfill. When they came and they asked for 100,000 zloty from the town, they gave this order to the Judenrat. They had to uh, decide which family should pay how much. So they were very influential. They had to submit lists, for instance, for people that were ordered, let's say, to go to work. Uh, the Germans didn't make the list. The Judenrat made the list. And obviously there were some good members and there were some bad members.
Who made up the Judenrat? Who was in it?
If my recollection is correct, there were no elections or anything, but there was a Judenrat before the war too. And before the war, if I don't know exactly, but they were elected. But when the war started, the same members remained as the Judenrat.
Was there a head of it?
Yes.
Do you
yes.
remember who that was?
Yes. His name was a man by the name of Crook. Crook. I don't remember his first name, but his name in Jalositz, he was the Judenrat Älteste, they call it, the chief.
Was there a Jewish police?
Yes, yes, of course. There was a Jewish police, and there again, you had some policemen who were decent and some policemen that forgot that they are Jews too, and they were nasty. And
did they have to answer to the Judenrat?
yes, the Judenrat was in charge. They had to answer to the Judenrat, but most of all, the Judenrat and everybody else had to answer to the Germans.
When this became a ghetto, you were coming on to bar mitzvah age. Did you celebrate a bar mitzvah at all?
Oh no, there were no times for celebration. I became 13 after the first year of the war in 1940. I don't even remember. There was nothing special, nothing.
Did you still continue, or did your father still continue going to shul?
No. As soon as the Germans came in, they closed the big shul, and the Beit Medrash, where my father used to go, turned into a place for maybe 70 families moved in there. The refugees moved in. So we used to have quorum in private homes. There was no more organized shul with the beginning of the war.
You mentioned you couldn't go to school any longer. What did you work?
Yes, the law was that boys from 12 on were forced to go to work. So there were times in the winter time where, for instance, the railroad tracks were covered. They came to the Judenrat and they demanded 200 people. So we got a notice. I got a notice. I had to submit myself, and we went out to work. In the summertime, we went out to work building roads, all kinds. Most of the time we worked, sure.
Now, you said it was difficult to get food. What did you do for food?
That was very difficult, but somehow we survived. Obviously, we ate much, much less than what we needed, even though it was a ghetto. But as I stated before, the Polish population could come in and out, and the farmers still brought in food, and whatever money we had scraped and whatever we could sell to raise money, we would buy. Food was very expensive, and when we bought food, my mom tried to use as little as possible. It should last as long as possible.
What did you do about kashrut?
Well, kashrut was no problem. It was no problem. Just like before the war, we had a kosher house, and during the war there was less food to bother with. We maintained the kashrut.
Did you need, you mentioned that the Judenrat would call you up to work and they wanted 200. Did you need a work permit?
No, I don't really remember the details All I know is that we got a notice, Nachum Kamelgard should tomorrow morning be in a certain spot. 50 people go out to work on a farm or to build roads or to shovel snow. One time I remember distinctly in the main part of the town there was the marketplace. There was a little garden with grass, and they took us over there and they gave us scissors to cut the grass, and we had to stay on our knees and cut grass with scissors. That I remember distinctly.
What happened next?
All this, from day to day, things went worse, from bad to worse. The big change took place in June of 1941 when the war started with Russia. My brother Moshe was arrested. 2 more people in town were arrested. There were 3 of them. And I don't know why there was no connection between these 3 people. They weren't like friends or anything. And they came to look for my brother, and my brother wasn't home. He had just survived and recuperated from a typhoid that he went through. He was still weak. The Germans came to look for him, and he wasn't home. And then they left word that he has to appear on the police station within a couple hours. And we didn't know, should he go or shouldn't he go. If he won't go, we figured they'll definitely come to grab him, they'll kill him. If he goes, maybe there is still some chance that, after all, I didn't know of anything that he did that required being arrested. He was arrested, and turned out that one of the Polish women in town, an informer, squealed on him, that he made some anti-German remarks, which obviously was not true, because even though he felt that way, he wouldn't confine into this cheap, informed prostitute, Genia Niebelska.
That was her name?
That was her famous name. So anyway, my brother was confined for practically 2 months. My mother was crying, and my father, we were all very depressed. Thank God he came home. For the time he survived, and all this was going from bad to worse until the first deportation, the first liquidation, which took place around September of 1942.
Where did you go next?
When we were all afraid of that liquidation, because we heard it taking place in other cities. Maybe the older people knew what's taking place. I didn't. I had hope. I couldn't conceive that they're going to take thousands of people and kill them and gas them. So I was frightened, and finally one afternoon they said the town is surrounded, and 4 members of my family, my father, mother, my sister Hannah, and myself, ran out of the house into the fields, and we went to hide with a Polish family, but she threw us out after 5 minutes, and we continued going into the fields, and we walked all night long. We wound up in Wyszlica, in the nearby town where my sister lived. We arrived there, and we found 3 of my brothers. No, I'm sorry, 2 of my brothers. And my cousin, my father's little niece that was staying with us.
Do you remember her name?
Yes, Paula. and two brothers were missing. One remained, that's Moshe, and the other one went to hiding with some other family. We were with my sisters for a short while, for a few weeks, and then the people started to gather back in town after the liquidation. When that first liquidation took place, over 2,000 people were shot that same evening in town. By that time, the city, from 6,000 from before the war, was close to 10,000 due to the Jewish refugees that came in from all over. They shot over 2,000 people. The rest went to the train. My brother Moshe was among them. They went to Miechov, a nearby town. There they had a selection. All the women went to the death gas chambers, and some of the young men were dropped off in a camp, Prokochim, near Krakow, and my brother Moshe was among them. Then people were hiding in the nearby villages near my town, Jaloshitsa, and they started to come back to town, and for some reason a small group of Jews started to regroup in Jaloshitsa. My family, my parents, my sister, my three brothers, my two brothers, we all went back to Jaloshitz. That was around Sukkot 1942, and we arrived to town, and there was a small community. My brother had returned from the camp that he was in Prokochim, and 2-3 days later we got word that Vishlitsa, where my sister lived with her husband and 2 kids, that they were liquidated, and we never heard from them again. Jaloshitsa continued to regroup, and this was already October. Then the beginning of November, rumors were that the liquidation is coming again. Now this time we had no place to go. My sister's place did no longer exist. So somebody recommended us to go hide with a Polish family. And we met this Polish family, and the decision at home was that only my parents, my sister, and I should go to hide there. My older brothers, being they were older, hopefully the same thing will happen like with the first liquidation, that they will be taken off into a camp.
What happened to Michael?
Michael was hiding with the family that he worked for in nearby Jaloshitsa also. And so 3 of my brothers went with the liquidation, and they no longer were dropped off in Prokochim or in any other working place. They were taken directly to the gas chambers. Never heard of them anymore. My parents, my sister. Let me not forget my little cousin Paula. When we came back from the first liquidation, when we reorganized in Jaloshitsa, her father lived in a nearby town. So he came to us, and he took his little daughter back. And obviously I don't know how they perished. Now my father, mother, my sister, and I were with this Polish family, and we were hiding there for about a week's time. And after a week's time, we arrived there in the beginning of November, approximately November 8th, which was a Friday. The following week, the following Saturday, a week, in other words, after 10 days, they chased us out.
Well, describe where you were hiding.
We were in this Polish family in their house. They had a farmhouse and they had a private home, and we were with them. And
did they feed you?
They gave us some food, obviously, but they were a big family, and there were different opinions among. Everybody had an opinion. Obviously, they took a great chance for keeping us. Some of the members said, let's throw them out. Some said, let's not. Obviously, those that said, let's throw them out won because they threw us out. And we were hiding with nearby another Jewish family, a family by the name of Urista. They were husband, wife, 3 sons, and a niece. After we were chased out, that famous Saturday night, and we managed to escape to Vojislav, to the hometown of my father, where he was born. A day later, we found out that this other family, Urista, was killed by this Polish farmer who hid them. So obviously, the fact that we were chased out maybe was for the good, because obviously, if he killed them, we probably would have been next. So we wound up in the ghetto of Vojislav at the end of 1942.
Describe the living conditions in that ghetto.
This is a joke to describe the conditions. We were in a room, for instance, that if an additional person came in, he couldn't get in because there wasn't enough standing room. Who talks about conditions? Conditions were horrible.
How many of you were in this room?
There was a room, maybe about 50 people. During the day, maybe you could lay down because some people stood up and walked out or something, but it was terrible conditions.
Did they have an appel there in the morning?
No, this was a ghetto. This was still families, whoever had families stayed together and so on. But in this Vojislav, we were only a short while.
Then what happened?
Then the new decree was published in the papers that only in certain places Jews can stay, and among these places was Krakow. And that all other places, there may be Sandomierz, Krakow, maybe some other few places. Any other place after December 31st, a Jew will be caught, will be shot. So again, we were up with serious problems. And by the way, into Vojislav, while we were there, my mother's brother, who lived in the same house with us before the war and during the war, he was hiding with some Gentiles, and they too threw him out. So he arrived to Vojislav too. So now we were, my parents, my sister, my uncle, his wife, his 4 children, and his wife's mother. So now we had to decide to go either to Kielce or to Sandomierz or to Krakow. And it wasn't a question of deciding, wherever it was an opportunity. So my father, being he was in his hometown, and the chief of the Polish police somehow knew him. And he went out and he met him and he says, "What can you do for us?" And the chief of police said, "Not much." And then for some reason there arrived a truck into the main place in Vojislav with 2 people. One was in a German uniform and one was a civilian. And apparently that Polish police, that chief, asked him, "Where are you going?" They must have spoken to each other or something. And he said, "To Krakow." So he says, "Hold it."
Good place to stop. We're going to change the tape.
Okay.